My controlling boyfriend said I couldn't go to my best friend's birthday party and would get raped in the dress I bought, so I went anyway, in an even more revealing outfit, and dumped him over the phone. He put a GPS tracker on my car, installed 3 tracking apps on my phone, and started measuring exactly 501 feet from my apartment to legally stalk me. My boyfriend was always extremely controlling, and when I was with him, I genuinely had no freedom of my own. It started with small things. He would tell me not to order wine when we went out to dinner, not to get extra cheese on my pasta because I didn't need the extra calories. Looking back, I think he started out small on purpose, making me question my self-worth and changing my perception of myself into someone who was never quite good enough. Once he had successfully ruined my self-image, he used this as his opportunity to escalate his controlling behavior. The control was calculated. First, he told me I wasn't allowed to have male friends, and I went along with it. Then I couldn't go out to clubs without him. Then I was never allowed to go to clubs at all, even when I begged him to come with me. Eventually, I couldn't go out at all, not even for a simple lunch or dinner with one of my girlfriends. Whenever I defied these ridiculous rules of his, I would get verbally abused and screamed at until I broke down. The very first time he yelled at me, I cried for hours. I come from an abusive household where yelling was always followed by physical violence. The first time I went against him and tried to stand up for myself was when he told me I wasn't allowed to meet up with a friend who had flown in from Italy, someone I hadn't seen in over a year. Up to this point, I would classify him as emotionally abusive, but not verbally aggressive. But this time, he absolutely lost it. He yelled at me and called me stupid. I cried after that, genuinely believing he would hurt me. The fact that he yelled hurt even more because he knew exactly how much trauma I had surrounding it. I suppose I can thank him for one thing. However, nowadays when someone yells at me, I'm no longer affected by it. This is because he yelled at me so frequently that I completely stopped responding. I stopped reacting entirely. It got to a point where every single time I stepped out of line, he would scream at me. Every time I would just nod my head, apologize, promise not to do it again, then have him coerce me into sex. I think I mentally checked out of the relationship a long time ago. I just never had the strength to actually end it. Well, my opportunity to finally end it came when my best friend's birthday party came around. The party was going to be at her house for her 22nd birthday. She gave me an invite but partially expected me not to show up. She knew all about my situation, and no matter how much she tried to talk me into leaving him, she never managed to fully convince me. He was also a genuinely scary looking guy, very tall and intimidating, so she never got in his face about it. I think she was almost as scared of him as I was. When she gave me the invite, I stared at it for the longest time. It was just a simple text on my phone, but I couldn't stop looking at it. I desperately wanted to attend. I decided I would risk asking my boyfriend if I could go. He yelled, told me absolutely not, and once again I just nodded and apologized for even asking. I was about to tell my friend no, but then something inside me clicked. I had a vivid flashback of my mother. She was exactly like me, trapped in a miserable relationship with a man she hated for 20 years. When I was little, I never understood why she didn't just leave. Now I understood completely, and in that moment, I vowed not to become her. I told my friend I was going to that party, regardless of what my boyfriend said. She hyped me up like crazy. The next day, while he was at work, I went dress shopping. I found a perfect dress with an open shoulder and a slit on the side, exposing just a bit of skin. It went down to just under my knees. Hardly scandalous. I sent my friend a picture, and she hyped me up even more. Then I texted my boyfriend. I told him I was going to the party whether he liked it or not, and that I was done having him control every aspect of my life. Either he could let me live my life with him, or I'd live it without him. I was in my boss beach era. My boyfriend was obviously not willing to relinquish any control over me. He responded frantically, asking me what the fuck I was doing, asking if I wanted to get robbed because of how I was dressed. We went back and forth, and I wasn't backing down. At the end of our conversation, I gave in to him. The only reason I gave in was because he threatened me. This was the first time he had ever threatened to actually lay hands on me. I was shaken to my core and genuinely frightened. Fine, have it your way. I'm not showing up, I responded by the end. He seemed pleased with this victory. I immediately texted my friend explaining what had happened, but she was insistent on me coming anyway. She told me I could crash at her place and assured me that her older brother would accompany me to get my stuff from my boyfriend's place whenever I was ready. She called me, and we had a very serious, long conversation where she finally convinced me to grow a pair and leave him for good. By this point, 4 hours had passed since I last texted my boyfriend, and I was at my best friend's party having the time of my life. I got a call from him asking where the fuck I was, and I calmly told him I was at the party. He got flustered and said, "I thought you said you weren't showing up." So I responded, "Yeah, not showing up back to yours. We're over." Then I hung up without letting him speak again. Out of pure spite, I sent him a picture of the dress I was actually wearing to the party. This one was way more revealing, showing some cleavage, midriff, and most of my legs. I knew he would go absolutely berserk when he saw it. Right after sending the photo, I blocked him on everything. The party was amazing, and I crashed at my best friend's place feeling free for the first time in years. This all went down yesterday, and I know he's going to try something to get me back. The next morning, I woke up on my best friend's couch with the worst hangover of my life. My phone was dead, which was probably a blessing. I plugged it in and watched as notification after notification flooded my screen. 17 missed calls from unknown numbers, 23 text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through them. They were all from him, using his friends' phones, his work phone, even what looked like a burner number. The messages started relatively calm but quickly escalated. The first few were variations of, "We need to talk," and "This is ridiculous." By message 10, he was alternating between calling me names and begging me to come back. The final messages were the most disturbing. He knew where I was. He'd driven by my friend's house at 3 a.m. and seen my car parked outside. My best friend Joni came downstairs and found me staring at my phone in horror. She took one look at my face and immediately made coffee. While the coffee brewed, she sat next to me and read through the messages. Her jaw clenched tighter with each one. Her older brother Nathan came down a few minutes later. He'd stayed over after the party to make sure everything was okay. When Joni showed him the messages, his expression darkened. He grabbed his keys and headed outside. Through the window, I watched him check around my car, looking underneath and in the wheel wells. When he came back inside, he was holding a small device. It was a GPS tracker. My hands started shaking. Nathan carefully placed the tracker on the kitchen counter and took photos of it from every angle. He explained that we needed documentation of everything. Joni was already creating a folder on her laptop, screenshotting all the messages and organizing them by time and date. I spent the rest of the morning in a daze. Nathan disabled the tracker and said he'd hold hold on to it as evidence. Joni helped me change all my passwords and check my phone for any tracking apps. We found 3. My ex had apparently been monitoring my location, my texts, and even my photos for months. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. We all froze. Nathan looked through the peephole and shook his head. It was him. My ex was standing on the front porch with a bouquet of roses and what looked like an expensive jewelry box. He knocked again, harder this time. Then he started calling out, saying he knew I was in there, that we needed to talk like adults. His voice was calm, almost sweet, but I knew that tone. It was the voice he used right before he exploded. Nathan gestured for us to stay quiet. We sat in silence for 20 minutes while my ex alternated between knocking, calling out apologies, and making threats. He said he'd wait there all day if he had to. He said he'd already called my work and told them I was sick. He said he'd paid my rent for the next 3 months so I didn't need to worry about money. That last part made my blood run cold. He'd paid my rent? How? He didn't have access to my lease. Unless. I grabbed my phone and logged into my apartment's tenant portal. Sure enough, 3 months of rent had been paid from an account that wasn't mine. Worse, there was a note in the system that I'd added an authorized payer to my account. I'd never done that. Joni immediately called the apartment complex while Nathan continued watching the door. My ex had moved to the side of the house now, trying to peer through windows. Nathan closed all the blinds and suggested we move to the back of the house. The apartment complex confirmed that someone had come in person yesterday, claiming to be my fiancé, and added themselves to my account. They'd had a copy of my lease and knew all my personal information. The property manager seemed confused when Joni explained the situation. They'd need me to come in person with ID to remove the authorized payer. My ex stayed outside for 3 more hours. During that time, he left the flowers and jewelry on the porch, slashed one of my tires, and left a note under my windshield wiper. Nathan retrieved the note after my ex finally drove away. It was 10 pages long, alternating between professing his love and detailing all the ways I'd betrayed him. That evening, we made a plan. I needed to get my belongings from his place, secure my apartment, and figure out how to stay safe. Nathan offered to go with me to get my things the next day. Joni said I could stay with them as long as I needed. I barely slept that night. Every car that drove by made me jump. Around 4 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. Someone had tried to access my account from an unrecognized device. Then another alert. Someone had tried to reset my email password. Then my social media accounts. He was systematically trying to break into every aspect of my digital life. The next morning, Nathan and I drove to my ex's apartment complex. I still had my key, but Nathan suggested we knock first. No answer. His car wasn't in its usual spot. We decided to risk it and go inside. The apartment was a disaster. Empty beer bottles covered every surface. The walls had new holes in them, fist-sized dents at shoulder height. Picture frames were smashed on the floor, our photos torn to pieces. But the most disturbing part was my belongings. Everything I owned was piled in the living room, and it looked like he'd gone through every single item. My clothes were cut up, my laptop was smashed, my jewelry box was empty, except for a note that said, "You don't deserve nice things." Nathan started taking photos while I gathered what I could salvage. We worked quickly, filling garbage bags with anything that wasn't completely destroyed. I found my important documents in the kitchen freezer, of all places, thankfully intact. My passport, birth certificate, and social security card were all there, wrapped in plastic. We were almost done when we heard a key in the lock. 17 missed calls, 3 tracking apps, a GPS on the car at 4 a.m. That's just a next-level hater. You know he's been sitting there cooking something up and looking at her every move. Then this dude paid her rent to pose as her fiancé? Wow, that's really all I could say. Thank God for Joni and Nathan, honestly. They are absolute angels. The key in the lock at the end of that section, my heart just stopped. Nathan grabbed my arm and we headed for the back door, but it was too late. My ex walked in, saw us, and his face went from surprise to furious in seconds. He started yelling immediately, demanding to know what Nathan was doing there, accusing me of cheating, saying this proved he was right about everything. Nathan stepped between us, staying calm but firm. He told my ex we were just collecting my belongings and would be leaving. My ex laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. He said I wasn't taking anything that he'd paid for. Since he'd supported me financially, everything in the apartment belonged to him. He grabbed one of the garbage bags and dumped it out, then started throwing my salvaged belongings across the room. Nathan pulled out his phone and started recording. This made my ex even angrier. He lunged forward, trying to grab the phone, but Nathan stepped back. I used the distraction to grab the bag with my documents and headed for the door. My ex noticed and moved to block me, but Nathan called out that he was calling the police. That stopped him. My ex knew he was already on thin ice from a previous incident with a neighbor. He stepped aside but promised this wasn't over. As we left, he shouted that I'd regret this, that I'd come crawling back when I realized no one else would put up with me. Back at Joni's house, we sorted through what I'd managed to save. It wasn't much. Most of my professional clothes were destroyed. My laptop with all my work files was gone. Years of photos and memories were trashed. But I had my important documents, and more importantly, I had my freedom. That afternoon, Joni helped me set up new bank accounts while Nathan installed security cameras around their house. We also went to my apartment complex to sort out the rent situation. The property manager was sympathetic once I explained everything. They removed my ex from the account and changed the locks on my apartment as a precaution. When we got to my apartment, it was clear he'd been there. Nothing was destroyed, but things were moved. My mail was opened and scattered on the counter. The flowers I'd had on my table were in the trash. There was a printed screenshot of the photo I'd sent him from the party taped to my bathroom mirror with "WAR" written across it in red marker. I collapsed on my couch, overwhelmed by everything. Joni sat with me while Nathan checked the apartment for any cameras or recording devices. He found 2, one in my bedroom and one in the living room. We called the police this time. They took a report but said without proof of who placed them, there wasn't much they could do. That night, I stayed at Joni's again. I couldn't face being in my apartment knowing he'd been there, touching my things, invading my space. I lay awake thinking about all the times I'd felt watched over the past few months, all the times he'd known things he shouldn't have known. It all made sense now. The following morning brought a new wave of anxiety when I discovered my work email flooded with messages from concerned colleagues. My ex had apparently sent emails from a spoofed address that looked like mine, telling everyone I was having a mental breakdown and needed space. Some messages contained embarrassing personal details about our relationship that I'd never shared with anyone at work. My manager called while I was reading through the emails. She explained that several clients had received strange messages, supposedly from me, rambling about personal issues and making inappropriate comments. I spent the next hour on the phone with IT, trying to secure my work accounts and trace the source of the fake emails. The damage to my professional reputation felt overwhelming. Nathan drove me to work so I could speak with HR in person. The building's security guard mentioned that someone matching my ex's description had been asking about me the previous day, claiming to be my fiancé picking up something I'd forgotten. The guard hadn't let him pass the lobby, but knowing he'd been there made my skin crawl. HR took the situation seriously, especially after I showed them the documentation we'd been collecting. They implemented new security protocols for me, including a different entrance to the building and an escort to my car after work. My manager moved my desk away from windows and closer to the security office. During my lunch break, I received a call from my landlord. My ex had contacted him claiming I'd abandoned the apartment and authorized him to collect my belongings. The landlord, thankfully, had found it suspicious and called me directly. I explained the situation and he agreed to flag my file, requiring my physical presence with ID for any changes. That afternoon, mutual friends started reaching out. My ex had been contacting everyone we knew, spinning elaborate stories about my mental state and our breakup. Some believed him initially, especially when he showed them edited text conversations that made me look unstable. I spent hours sending screenshots of the real conversations, showing his manipulation tactics. One friend, Sarah, called me crying. She'd let him into her apartment when he claimed he needed to pick up a birthday gift he'd hidden there for me. While she was in the bathroom, he'd gone through her phone and deleted my contact information, then sent himself screenshots of our conversations. She felt violated and guilty for falling for his act. The pattern became clear as more friends reached out. He was systematically trying to isolate me, turning our social circle against me with carefully crafted lies. Some friends saw through it immediately, but others bought into his performance of the concerned ex-boyfriend worried about my well-being. Joni suggested we be proactive. We spent the evening calling every mutual friend, explaining the situation before he could reach them. Most were supportive, but a few seemed skeptical, especially when he'd already planted seeds of doubt about my mental state. It hurt to realize how effectively he could manipulate people I'd known for years. The next day, I discovered he'd been busy with more than just social manipulation. My credit card company called about suspicious activity. Someone had tried to make several large purchases using my card information. The attempts were declined thanks to fraud protection, but it meant I had to cancel all my cards and wait for new ones. While dealing with the credit card situation, I got a notification that someone had tried to log into my student loan account. Then my phone company texted about a request to add a line to my account. He was attempting to access every aspect of my financial life, probably looking for leverage or ways to cause chaos. Nathan helped me place fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus and freeze my credit. We spent hours on the phone with various companies, securing accounts and documenting the attempted breaches. Each call meant explaining the situation again, reliving the stress while trying to protect myself from further damage. My ex's tactics shifted when his digital attempts failed. I started finding things at my apartment door: flowers, letters, gifts, and food deliveries I hadn't ordered. The building's security cameras caught him leaving items late at night, always wearing different clothes and hats as if that would somehow make it less creepy. The letters were the worst part. They cycled through different emotional manipulations. One would be filled with apologies and promises to change. The next would blame me for ruining his life. Then another would detail all the ways he still loved me. Some contained photos of us from happier times, with notes about how perfect we'd been together. One morning, I found my car covered in sticky notes, hundreds of them, each with a single word or phrase. Sorry, please, come back, I love you, we belong together. It must have taken him hours. Nathan helped me document everything with photos before spending an hour peeling them off. The harassment escalated to my workplace again. Flowers arrived at reception with increasingly desperate notes. He sent food deliveries during meetings, forcing me to apologize to clients for the interruptions. My coworkers grew uncomfortable with the constant disruptions, and I worried about how it was affecting my professional standing. Then came the packages. First, it was lingerie from an expensive boutique, delivered to my office with a note about how beautiful I'd look in it. Then jewelry I'd admired months ago, which meant he'd been keeping track of everything I'd ever mentioned wanting. Each gift came with letters describing intimate moments from our relationship. My breaking point came when he sent a package to my parents' house. They lived 2 states away, and I'd been careful not to involve them, knowing they'd worry. But somehow he'd found their address and sent them a long letter portraying himself as the victim, claiming I'd left him for another man and was having a breakdown. My mother called in tears, confused and frightened by the detailed letter full of lies about my behavior. I spent 3 hours on the phone explaining everything, listening to her cycle through anger at him and fear for my safety. My father wanted to drive down immediately, but I convinced them to stay put. The stress was affecting every aspect of my life. I could barely sleep, jumping at every noise outside. My appetite disappeared, and I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. Work became difficult as I struggled to concentrate, constantly checking security cameras and looking over my shoulder. Joni and Nathan remained incredible throughout everything. They installed extra locks on their doors and added motion sensor lights around the property. Nathan changed his schedule to be home whenever Joni had to leave, ensuring I was never alone. Their support kept me from completely falling apart. One evening, while we were having dinner, Joni's phone rang. It was her mother, confused about a Facebook message she'd received about Joni being in danger because of her mentally unstable friend. My ex had started targeting my support system, trying to make them doubt me or feel unsafe helping me. We discovered he'd created fake social media profiles using my photos, posting erratic content, and sending disturbing messages to people I knew. The profiles were sophisticated, using photos I'd never posted publicly, which meant he'd saved pictures from when he had access to my phone. Fighting back against the fake profiles took days. Each platform had different procedures for reporting impersonation, requiring extensive documentation. Meanwhile, the fake accounts kept posting, damaging my reputation with every passing hour. Some people reached out to check if the posts were real, but others simply unfriended or blocked me. The workplace harassment reached a new level when he started calling my office pretending to be different people. Sometimes he was a concerned family member, other times a doctor claiming I'd missed appointments. My receptionist became skilled at recognizing his voice despite his attempts to disguise it, but the constant calls disrupted the entire office. I finally decided to return to my apartment, needing some sense of normalcy despite the fear. Nathan and Joni insisted on checking it first, looking for any signs of entry or tampering. We changed the locks again and added a security bar to the door, but I still felt exposed and vulnerable. Living alone again proved harder than expected. Every creak of the building made my heart race. I kept lights on in every room and obsessively checked the locks. Sleep became elusive as I lay awake analyzing every sound, wondering if he was outside watching. My ex seemed to sense influenced my return. I feel like I can actually hear the exhaustion in every word as she describes dealing with all these attacks on her life. The image in my head right now of him spending hours putting sticky notes all over her car in the middle of the night is so unsettling. I can't even imagine how violated she must feel seeing him use private photos from their relationship to create fake profiles. The harassment intensified with items left at my door daily. Coffee I once mentioned liking, takeout from restaurants we'd visited together, books by authors I enjoyed. Each item showed how much he'd cataloged about my preferences, turning innocent memories into weapons of manipulation. Then came the notes slipped under my door in the middle of the night. I'd wake up to find handwritten letters that must have taken hours to compose, detailing our entire relationship history and his interpretation of where things went wrong. They always ended with promises that he could change if I'd just give him another chance. The psychological toll was immense. I found myself questioning my decision to leave, not because I wanted him back, but because the harassment was exhausting. He was winning through sheer persistence, wearing down my resolve with constant reminders of his presence in my life. Nathan suggested documenting everything in a single organized file. We created a comprehensive timeline with dates, photos, screenshots, and recordings. The file grew disturbingly large, evidence of how consumed he'd become with controlling me even after our relationship ended. My work situation became untenable when he figured out my new parking spot and started leaving notes on my windshield. Security footage showed him entering the garage late at night, somehow bypassing the keycard system. IT discovered he'd tailgated other employees, waiting for opportunities to slip in unnoticed. The company increased security measures, but I could see the strain it was causing. My coworkers were sympathetic but frustrated with the constant disruptions. My manager gently suggested I might benefit from taking some time off, which felt like punishment for being a victim. During this forced leave, I focused on securing every aspect of my life. I changed banks entirely, not just accounts. I switched phone carriers and got a new number, giving it only to essential contacts. I even considered legally changing my name, but decided that was letting him win. One afternoon, while organizing the evidence file with Nathan, we noticed patterns in his behavior. The harassment always intensified around significant dates. The anniversary of our first date, my birthday, holidays we'd spent together. He was stuck in the past, trying to force me back into a relationship that existed only in his mind. This realization helped me understand that reasoning with him was impossible. He'd created a fantasy where I was confused or influenced by others, where our breakup was temporary and fixable. No amount of clear communication would penetrate that delusion, because he'd convinced himself my words didn't reflect my true feelings. The situation with mutual friends grew more complex. Some who'd initially supported me grew tired of the drama, suggesting I should just talk to him and end the conflict. They didn't understand that engagement would only encourage him, that he'd interpret any contact as progress toward reconciliation. I lost several friendships during this time, people who couldn't handle the complexity of the situation, who found it easier to believe his victim narrative than support me through something difficult. It hurt, but it also revealed who my true friends were. One night, exhaustion overtook caution, and I forgot to check the people before answering a knock. It was him, looking disheveled and desperate. My body froze as he started talking rapidly about how he'd figured out what was wrong, how he understood now, how he could fix everything if I'd just listen. Nathan appeared behind me within seconds, firmly telling my ex to leave. The confrontation was brief but intense, with my ex insisting he just needed 5 minutes to explain. Nathan's presence prevented escalation, but the encounter left me shaking for hours afterward. That incident prompted us to explore legal options more seriously. We consulted with a lawyer who specialized in harassment cases, learning about restraining orders and documentation requirements. The legal system offered some protection, but the process would be lengthy and required extensive evidence. I started therapy to deal with the psychological impact. My therapist helped me understand that his behavior wasn't my fault, that leaving had been the right decision despite the current harassment. She taught me coping strategies for the anxiety and hypervigilance that had become constant companions. The harassment took a new form when packages started arriving for neighbors with my name on them. He was trying to embarrass me in my building, making me look unstable or careless. I had to explain the situation to multiple neighbors, further spreading the impact of his obsession. My landlord remained supportive but expressed concern about the building's safety. Other tenants were uncomfortable with the constant drama, and I couldn't blame them. I started looking for new apartments, hating that I was being forced from a home I loved because of his actions. The financial impact grew as costs accumulated. Therapy sessions, security measures, legal consultations, time off work. He'd found a way to punish me economically without direct access to my accounts. The stress of mounting expenses added another layer to an already overwhelming situation. Through it all, Joni and Nathan remained steadfast. They never made me feel like a burden despite the chaos I'd brought into their lives. Their home became my safe haven, a place where I could relax without constantly checking locks and windows. The next morning brought an unexpected development. My ex showed up at Joni's house with what looked like official paperwork. Nathan intercepted him at the door while Joni and I watched from the window. My ex was waving documents around, his face red with frustration. Nathan remained calm, keeping the door partially closed between them. After several minutes of heated gestures from my ex, Nathan took the papers and closed the door. He brought them to the kitchen table where we could examine them. My ex had filed a small claims court case against me for emotional damages and breach of relationship contract. The amount he was seeking was $15,000, itemized as compensation for gifts, dates, and emotional investment. The paperwork was amateur at best, clearly self-filed without legal counsel. He'd listed ridiculous items like 200 hours of emotional support at $50 per hour and depreciation of engagement ring never purchased but planned. Despite the absurdity, we knew we'd have to respond formally or risk a default judgment. That afternoon, we visited the lawyer again. She reviewed the documents and barely suppressed a laugh at some of his claims. She explained that while his case had no merit, we'd need to file a response and likely appear in court. She helped us draft a counterclaim for harassment and property damage, attaching our extensive documentation. Over the next few days, my ex's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started showing up at random locations where he thought I might be. The grocery store, the gym, even the library. Each time he'd try to approach me with new evidence for his case or attempts to negotiate. I learned to recognize his car from a distance and would immediately leave any location where I spotted it. The fake social media profiles multiplied. He created accounts impersonating not just me, but also Joni and Nathan, posting inflammatory content designed designed to damage all our reputations. We spent hours reporting accounts, only to have new ones appear within days. The platform's response was frustratingly slow, requiring multiple reports before taking action. One morning, I discovered he'd been leaving reviews for my workplace online, posing as dissatisfied clients. The reviews contained enough accurate details about our services to seem legitimate, but included false claims about my professionalism. My manager had to involve our legal department to get them removed, adding another layer of stress to my work situation. Nathan noticed someone had been tampering with my car overnight. Nothing was damaged, but things were slightly moved. The mirrors adjusted, the seat pushed back. We realized my ex still had a spare key from when we were together. The locksmith came that afternoon to rekey the entire car, another unexpected expense. The court date arrived faster than expected. I dressed professionally and arrived early with Nathan and Joni for support. My ex showed up alone, carrying a thick folder of what he considered evidence. He'd printed every text message we'd ever exchanged, highlighting passages he felt proved I owed him money. The judge listened patiently as my ex presented his case, growing visibly skeptical as the claims became more outlandish. When my turn came, our lawyer presented our counterclaim with the documented harassment, property damage, and stalking behaviors. The judge's expression shifted from skepticism to concern as she reviewed our evidence. My ex tried to interrupt several times, insisting the evidence was fabricated or taken out of context. The judge warned him about courtroom behavior and threatened to have him removed if he continued disrupting proceedings. His face turned red, but he remained silent for the remainder of the hearing. The judge dismissed his case entirely and granted our counterclaim. She ordered him to pay $3,000 in damages and issued a restraining order requiring him to stay 500 feet away from me, my home, and workplace. The relief I felt was immediate but tempered by concern about enforcement. Outside the courthouse, my ex waited by his car, technically far enough away to comply with the order but clearly positioned to ensure I'd see him. He held up his phone, taking photos as we exited. Nathan documented this behavior, knowing we might need it for future violations. That evening, the harassment shifted to digital channels exclusively. Anonymous emails flooded my inbox with increasingly disturbing content. Phone calls came from spoofed numbers at all hours. My new phone number had somehow been discovered, forcing me to change it again. The restraining order seemed to escalate rather than deter his behavior. He found loopholes and technicalities, always staying just within legal boundaries while maintaining his presence in my life. He'd park 501 feet from my apartment, technically compliant but psychologically intrusive. Work became increasingly difficult as the stress affected my performance. Despite my manager's understanding, I could see the situation was becoming untenable. I started looking for new positions, hoping a fresh start might help me leave this nightmare behind. During this time, an old college friend reached out after seeing one of the fake profiles. She worked in cybersecurity and offered to help trace the accounts. Within days, she'd gathered enough technical evidence to prove my ex was behind all of them, including IP addresses and device fingerprints. We took this new evidence to the police, finally having concrete proof of who was behind the digital harassment. They took it more seriously this time, especially with the restraining order in place. A detective was assigned to the case, though they warned that prosecution for cyber harassment could be challenging. My ex must have sensed the walls closing in. The harassment suddenly stopped completely. No emails, no calls, no fake profiles. The silence was almost more unsettling than the constant contact. I found myself waiting for the next attack, unable to believe it was really over. 3 weeks passed without incident. I slowly began to relax, though I maintained all security precautions. Nathan helped me install a new security system in my apartment, and I finally felt safe enough to spend nights there alone again. Then I received a letter from my ex's mother. Did this dude really measure out exactly 501 feet just to keep tormenting her? I feel so relieved the judge saw through his ridiculous claims about charging for emotional support hours, but then seeing how the restraining order actually made things worse breaks my heart. She can't even feel safe at work anymore and has to think about leaving her job because of him. She apologized for her son's behavior and revealed he'd been admitted to a psychiatric facility after what she described as a breakdown. She assured me he was receiving help and wouldn't be able to contact me during his treatment. The relief was overwhelming, but I remained cautious. I continued therapy, working through the trauma and rebuilding my sense of safety. My therapist helped me understand that healing wouldn't be linear, that I'd have good days and bad days. Gradually, life began to normalize. I returned to work full-time, rebuilding professional relationships damaged during the harassment. Friends who distanced themselves during the drama slowly returned, and I worked on forgiving those who hadn't supported me when I needed them most. 6 months later, I learned through mutual acquaintances that my ex had completed treatment and moved to another state to live with relatives. The restraining order remained in effect, but the distance provided additional comfort. I finally felt like I could breathe again. I never fully returned to the person I was before the relationship and its aftermath. The experience left scars, but also taught me strength I didn't know I possessed. I learned to recognize red flags earlier, to trust my instincts, and to value the people who stood by me during the darkest period of my life. Joni and Nathan became family to me in ways that transcended friendship. Their unwavering support had saved me in more ways than one. We still have dinner together every week, a tradition born from those terrifying months that evolved into something beautiful. My apartment became a sanctuary again, decorated with new memories and free from the shadow of fear. I adopted a rescue cat who helped make the space feel less empty. Some nights were still difficult, but they became less frequent as time passed. The financial impact took longer to resolve. Between legal fees, security measures, and lost work time, I'd accumulated significant debt. I took on freelance projects to pay it off, using the experience as motivation to build a more stable financial foundation. Dating remained off the table for a long time. The thought of trusting someone new felt impossible. When I finally did start meeting people again, I was hypervigilant about red flags, sometimes to a fault. It took time to find balance between caution and openness. The documentation we'd compiled served one final purpose: helping another woman going through similar harassment. A friend of Sarah's reached out after hearing my story, dealing with her own stalking situation. I shared our strategies and resources, hoping to spare her some of the isolation I'd experienced. Looking back, the most valuable lesson wasn't about recognizing abuse or escaping it. It was about the importance of support systems and the strength found in accepting help. I'd spent so long believing I had to handle everything alone, but it was only through relying on others that I truly found freedom. My story doesn't have a neat ending because life rarely provides them. There's no moment where everything suddenly became perfect. perfect. Instead, there were countless small victories. The first night I slept soundly, the first day I didn't check over my shoulder, the first time I laughed without reservation. The experience fundamentally changed me, but not in the ways my ex intended. Instead of making me smaller and more controllable, it revealed a resilience I'd never recognized. I learned that leaving was just the first step in a much longer journey toward reclaiming my life. Now, I share my story not for sympathy, but as a reminder that escape is possible, that support exists, and that the aftermath, however difficult, is survivable. The journey from victim to survivor isn't linear or easy, but it's worth every difficult step. Reading this one was hard, but I'm glad she found her way back to herself piece by piece, especially when Joni and Nathan became like family to her through all of this. My heart feels so full knowing that his mom got him into treatment and he moved away. That's all for now though. Thanks all for watching.